Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and if you're watching this the day it came out, it is the 2-year anniversary of our friend the PlayStation 5, which is, it's kind of hard to believe it's been 2 years, and then it's also kind of not, because I've really only had it for like a little over a year, because these things are impossible to get, but obviously we'll get into that. But anyway, before we do all that, do me a favor, if you could like this video, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't done that already. Also, check me out on all the social media stuff. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Discord, Patreon, my new channel, Flying and Eating. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff there. I think you can also follow me on Facebook. That's still a thing, right? Anyway, yeah, please do that. I appreciate the support. As always, that new channel, if you like the idea of seeing restaurants and different parts of the world and adventures, like that's the new channel. That's fun. But anyway, yes, let's talk about the anniversary here of the PlayStation 5. So I'm going to be totally honest with you. Not a whole lot has happened in the last year, other than just a couple of little oddities that I think are just kind of interesting. See, if you already watched the Xbox Series X video, then I talked a lot about like how Microsoft's model is completely different than everybody's. Nintendo, of course, has a different model, and I apologize again that I didn't do an anniversary video for that. I was at a very kind of broken mental state around the time of that video. If you don't know why that is, long story short, my childhood home, my late mother's home, had a huge house fire due to an explosion, and it was not a good time, and I was like, I can't really think about the Nintendo Switch right now. It was, but whatever. Anyway, so I apologize for that video never coming into fruition, but we're here, we can do this now. But yeah, Nintendo is off in a corner doing its own thing. Sony is interesting because they're the only one of the three that's still kind of following the original traditional game cycle concept of a generation, which was always, you go for about 5 years, you have your standard releases, you focus on your own first-party titles, and you try to recruit some interesting third-party exclusives and stuff like that. Whereas, obviously, as we went to great length to explain, Microsoft's entire thing is Game Pass, and everybody can play, and who really cares? Nintendo's off in a corner just with a helmet on saying, like, we have the Switch, it's 2012, but you love it. Whatever, which is fine. I actually respect Sony for doing that. However, you have to ask if that's hurting them. As we've gone to great lengths to explain, and I think we all kind of know it, the future is a very digital place, even though I personally am a huge fan of physical media. And Sony was very much not prepared for this. Like, they just have not had that kind of success on that Game Pass type of level. I mean, there's been all sorts of rumors and discussions about them launching their own service, and I think they briefly did, and they flirted with it, PlayStation like Super Plus, I don't even remember the name of it, and it just really hasn't panned out for them. They're still just kind of adhering to the traditional model, and I'm of two minds on that, because I understand that model is not going to work long term. They are not going to survive on that. But at the same time, I love it because look at this. I got a nice stack of physical games. We've got imports, we've got domestic, we've got indies, we got AAAs. I got a whole bunch of great stuff here that I'm super happy with. But am I an outlier? Like, am I just liking it because I'm old? I don't really know. I love the fact that Sony was like, yeah, limited run games and all these other indie, companies that make small published stuff, go nuts, have physical editions on the PlayStation 5. Both Sony and Nintendo are super on board with that. Microsoft is not. Microsoft forces everybody, if you want your indie game on our console, that's fine, but it's got to either go on Game Pass or digital only. We're not going to allow small print run stuff, which is really like, oh, okay, it'd be nice to have that. But, so I celebrate Sony for that, but in their own interests, I kind of hope that they change that up, because I'm not trying to paint this picture that like Sony's in some serious trouble and that the PlayStation won't exist in a few years. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is a point in which they need to start making some changes, or eventually it will get to that. Eventually being a long time, but eventually if they don't start changing their behaviors, that will be a problem for them. So that aside, those are just some concerns I have, but let's talk about some other things. Let's talk about some recent history, as it were. So I think the most obvious thing to say about the PlayStation 5 is that you still can't buy it. Like normally, you cannot walk into a store and just get one. And I think that's wholly ironic because, again, they're the only ones adhering to the traditional model of a console. 2 years into a console's lifespan, you either exist widely or your console is no longer supported. You're not at a point where you're still like the dominant console or one of, and no one can buy you. That is unique right here with the PlayStation 5. And so, like, okay, as I said, I got a traveling channel, right? in that channel. I've been to a bunch of different places. I've never seen a PS5 in stock anywhere until very, very recently. And when I say that, I mean it's usually used. So I was in Portugal not too long ago. Went into a couple of used game stores, and there they had them. They had PS5s. Wow, I couldn't believe it. They're in stock. 880 euros. That's $880 at the time I'm recording this due to the currency being on par. For a used one? 2 years in? What? That's insane. And actually, I'm gonna give you a complete mind-blowing moment. At the time I record this, only a few weeks ago, I was in Vancouver, Canada, specifically a town called Delta, right by the Point Roberts, Washington border, which is this weird little American enclave that's part of the U.S. and probably shouldn't be, but whatever it is. And you can watch the video again, we went there. But we went to a store on the Canadian side called Shoppers, which is like a Walgreens. We go in there looking for Canadian snacks and stuff like that. And while we're in there, for the first time in our entire lives, we saw a retail PS5 in stock, just sitting there. Now, unfortunately, it was the discless only one. Otherwise, we actually thought, we're like, dude, I would buy this. You know, if it was the disc-based version, I don't even need it. I would still buy it because of how impossible they are to get. So that's how shocking that moment was. Now, you have to ask the question, why? And while a lot of people want to throw out answers like intentional scarcity and all this sort of, you know, Jim Ryan's a complete idiot, we'll get back to him, etc., I actually got to give them a pass on this. This is not their fault. This is something gamers, I think, don't focus a whole lot on, is global economics. It's not something that tends to interest most of us. But Sony is kind of the victim of something called the end of globalization. Microsoft is also a victim of this. They're just they're more able to easily weather this storm just because of they preset themselves up for a digital infrastructure and their stuff works across all their platforms. So even though you can't really buy the Series X, Series S is still sitting around in stock and all their lower hardware is still like readily available, and Game Pass can exist on different platforms, including built into televisions. So you can still get the Xbox experience. You can do it on your computer, etc. Sony doesn't have that luxury. You got to buy this thing. And the problem is they don't really exist. And they don't exist. Well, Nintendo also has a surplus, massive amount of stock, and a lot of people already have them, so demand is lower. Sony's in the middle there, where everybody wants their console and they can't make it. That is, again, because of end of globalization. And it's really hard to explain this without going way into like a political, historical spectrum, which we're not going to do. So I will condense this way down just to say that for the last 30 years or so, since the beginning of the early 90s, the entire world has kind of coexisted in a basic economic model whereby one country will source some materials, another country will source some materials, another country will source some parts, and another country will source some labor, and another country will source some security, etc. And all of those elements of all these different countries coming together, where every country specializes in one thing or another, unifies at a single point where your PlayStation 5 is produced. This thing has materials from countries all over the world. It's put together by different places all over the world, and it's shipped out by different countries going to different places, secured by other countries. In other words, there's a lot of pieces in this chain. And if that chain breaks down for any reason, the whole system shuts down, like Christmas lights. You got a bad one, the whole thing goes down. Where that started was really during the pandemic. I'm just going to be honest, like, whatever, that's really the initial trigger point where it caused it. And then over the last couple of years, a lot of countries, I'm not going to say which and what, but a lot of political changes have occurred and a lot of global tensions have occurred. And yeah, that's why you can't get a PS5 right now. It sucks. And it's going to take a few years before everybody kind of reshuffles the pieces of where everything's being built, by who it's being built, you know, by, and in which locations that's happening, etc. It's going to take a few years. But in the meantime, PS5s cost 880 euros used. Really sucks. I agree. So if I had to call a prediction on this, it's not like Sony's not aware of this, but I think this model of the PS5 was built in the old era of thinking as far as construction was concerned. There's a lot of rumors right now that Sony's going to do some sort of slim PS5. I believe that wholeheartedly. I think they absolutely will do that. And I think they've been redesigning it with, okay, which countries are still playing ball with this system and where can we build this most efficiently? You'll get a cheaper, much more reduced version of the PlayStation 5. Kind of think like taking the PS3, like 60 gig original one that was like $600 and it had like everything under the hood, where they're going to shave off a bunch of stuff, make it a lot smaller, and that's how you got the PS3 Slim that they made cheaper, etc. I kind of feel like we're going with almost that type of haircut, which is not even a haircut, that's like a butcher's knife. But I think they'll probably do that at some point just to get PS5s on store shelves. We'll see how that plays out. That's my big prediction, is that I think they'll announce, if not release, a new model of the PS5 sometime in 2023. But I think the next big thing that's really worth talking about here with the PlayStation 5 over the last year is not so much any one particular game, so much policy change or anything sort of about the console. It's really just been kind of watching Jim Ryan in particular be the head of PlayStation. So that's who he is. I don't know if you know who he is, but that's the guy. The guy who's running PlayStation currently is a guy named Jim Ryan. And I would say he's not great at his job. I would say he's not really qualified to be in that job. And he kind of had a big Bernie Stolar moment this year. Now, if you don't know who Bernie Stolar was, the RIP, he was the president of Sega in the 90s in the Sega Saturn era. And very famously, the thing he's best remembered for, even though he was actually pretty good at that job in a lot of different areas, he had this one moment that really just is what everyone will always remember him for. And I believe it was 1997, going into 1998. He straight up said something to the effect, the quote was always, "The Saturn is not our future." Now, what that moment meant was he was saying to the public, even though the Sega Saturn's only been out for a couple of years, we're not going to keep supporting that. That doesn't matter. We're not going to keep doing that. Now, he didn't really mean it that way. What he was trying to basically express was like, at Sega, we're working on different projects, and, Sega of Japan is the one that really cares about the Saturn, and we're thinking like this will change up at some point. He just phrased it really badly, but that was how it was interpreted, is don't buy a Saturn, Sega's about to give up on it. Now, Jim Ryan had a similar, albeit not nearly as terrible moment earlier this year when he was basically talking about Call of Duty. So here's what's going on with that. So Activision is about to be acquired by Microsoft, most likely, unless certain countries which ban that from occurring, which actually could happen. I'm no expert on this, as I said before in the Microsoft or in the Xbox video, but when a company buys another company, it actually has to get legally passed by the country in which that is operating. So every country in which both Microsoft and Activision function in has to pass a rule saying, yep, it's okay for that merger to go through. Saudi Arabia, for example, was actually the first country to say, yes, the merger is fine. While I don't have a whole list in front of me, I know the UK in particular is talking about blocking it. Now, what consequences that would have, I don't really know, but that's not the point. The point is that Jim Ryan has been adamantly out there trying to stop this merger from happening. Now, the reason he's so opposed to it all boils down to Call of Duty specifically. The thing we have to remember as gamers is, even though you're the type of person out there who would be interested in watching some dork talk about the history of a game console over its last year, while he just flatly at a single camera shot, just talking about that the whole time. Thank you for that, by the way. While you would have interest in that, the vast majority of people who play video games and buy video games are not you, and they are not me. They're just what we call the casuals. Now, the casuals, sadly, make up the largest percentage of people who actually buy video games. It's just that they focus on a very specific amount. That's why, no matter how much most of us hate them, the sports games, especially Madden, is stupid popular, because your casuals will always buy those. That's why, even though Sonic hasn't had a good game since Sonic Mania, he still sells a ton, because casuals are like, oh yeah, Sonic, I remember Sonic when I was a kid. I used to play Sonic on the Sega machine. I'll get that. And of course, Mario is always popular. Of course, we actually like Mario in this club, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's always kind of the same group. The other one of those few games that has ever broken through that and actually become that sort of popular is the Call of Duty franchise. Well, I would say traditional gamers almost find it like ironic to like Call of Duty in almost like a hipster way at this point. It is still a stupid popular franchise. It just is. So to lose one of those on the PlayStation 5 would be a significant blow to Sony. And so that's why Jim Ryan has been out there trying everything he can to block that from occurring. Now, he did something you are not supposed to do. So I'm not only a gamer and a YouTuber, I'm actually, in the industry. I've actually been to a lot of these things where I get to get exposed to how the sausage is made. And even though gamers want to believe that they have a right to hear everything that's going on behind closed doors, it's often in your best interest not to, because it causes a lot of economic problems that prevent the very games from being made that you want. It's how economics works. It's a complicated balancing act, just like globalization. So one thing he did that was really stupid is that he got together with Phil Spencer. Phil Spencer is the head of Xbox, and he basically told, Jim Ryan, he's like, look, man, we're buying Activision. It's happening. It's going to occur. We're going to own all those IPs. It's going to be ours. We're going to throw you a bone here, though. Like, we're going to continue to honor all the contracts Activision made with you. Everything they said they would do, we're going to continue to do. And as a bonus, we're going to give you 3 additional years of Call of Duty, which I want to be very clear. Microsoft is a corporation that exists for the sole purpose of generating revenue. Sony is a corporation that exists for the sole purpose of generating revenue. They have financial interests. I understand both of their motivations in this. Microsoft is under no requirement to continue to fund their corporate opponent. They don't have to give them Call of Duty. They don't have to give them anything. That's the same reason they don't have to put Halo on this thing. They don't have to do any of that. They're rivals. That's the whole point. But that said, Phil Spencer was still like, yeah, man, just as a bonus, sorry, something fell over there. Just as a bonus, we're going to give you 3 years of Call of Duty. That is a very behind closed doors conversation. And Jim Ryan, in every way, should have taken that deal. He didn't. Instead, he walks out, publicly declares, I can't believe we're only going to have Call of Duty for 3 years, or something to that effect. Now, I can only speculate on what he thought would happen by saying that. I think he might have believed either he was just frustrated and he was just venting publicly, which is not smart for someone in that job, in that position. It is also not something. He might have also thought maybe if this comes out, it'll go to Twitter and like everyone will go nuts and Microsoft will be forced to just give us Call of Duty in perpetuity, or all governments will not allow the passage of this thing to go through. Maybe that was a Hail Mary move. Maybe that's what he thought would happen. But in reality, that's his Bernie Stolar moment. He just told everybody, hey, do you like Call of Duty? Don't invest in a PlayStation. We're not going to have it much longer. That's a really stupid move, man. This is the same guy. I want to point this out. This is the same guy that attempted to shut down the PlayStation 3 and kind of sort of did. The guy who did shut down the PSP. The guy who did shut down or is basically shutting down the PlayStation Vita. Same guy. Also the same guy who was quoted as playing, he was at some sort of Sony event where they have the history of Gran Turismo and they have all the different games up, and he was mocking the games on the PlayStation 1 and 2, basically being like, who would ever want to play this? This looks terrible. And he's making fun of the concept of backwards compatibility and history of preservation and having and respecting Sony's own PlayStation legacy. That's really the most interesting thing that happened with the PS5 this year, is that we really saw the true incompetence of Jim Ryan. That guy should not be running PlayStation. The irony here, Sony is the only one of the big three that is still following the traditional game model of we release a new console, we make games just for it, maybe we put some backwards compatibility in as a bonus. To its credit, it does play PS4 titles. It's actually the best PS4 that exists. And we try to focus on our own individual IPs that make the console exciting and interesting. We make them all on physical media. We lure in developers and say, hey, make a really cool exclusive. I think all the new Silent Hill stuff that's coming up is going to be exclusive to the PS5, at least for a while. That's the traditional game model. That's how that's supposed to work. But the guy in charge of that doesn't even understand the history of game consoles. He doesn't even know why he's there. This guy is wholly unqualified to be there, man. So I just find a certain irony in that. I am concerned because while I said before, I don't think the PlayStation is like suddenly going to cease to exist or any sort of extreme like that. I do think that if they continue with some of these really bad decisions, coupled with the fact that they can barely produce the console, they're going to have some serious issues down the road. I think that what they need to do is get someone else in-house who understands a little bit more about where the technology is going and better invest in that ecosystem and that infrastructure. Sony looks at Microsoft like their super opponent, and they just constantly giving them middle finger and stuff, not realizing Microsoft has moved past them and does not care what Sony does. In fact, it's probably Microsoft's goal to get Game Pass on PlayStation hardware at some point. Sony also kind of treats Nintendo the same way. They're like, look at them with the binoculars, let's spy on them. You know, what do they make? They made the DS, let's make the Vita. You know, or whatever. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they just they made the Wiimotes, let's do the PlayStation Move. I know that's an older reference, but like Sony's always kind of looked at Nintendo as like, what are they doing? Let's do it too. They kind of look at everybody like they really just distrust them, whereas their opponents don't really seem to care what they do. And it's a certain paranoia that's weird over there if you look at their history of it. So I think that they need to get over that to a certain extent. I think you need to bring in a guy who really kind of understands the history of game consoles, the legacy of game consoles, why it's important to cater to your fans and not piss them off in every way you possibly can. You also you have a nearly Herculean task of trying to make PlayStation 5s readily available, which you can chastise Jim Ryan all you want for a lot of things. That one's not his fault. That has nothing to do with him. But sourcing new like making a new model that maybe can get around some of those constraints, that is probably happening, to be fair. I think that's kind of the stuff they need to do. Otherwise, I'm worried about where they'll be. And to the last point on that, you have to look at Japan. So goes Japan, so goes the game industry. PS5 is beating the Xbox Series X in Japan, as would be expected because Microsoft has never won in Japan. The closest they ever got was a brief hiccup where Japan kind of fell in love with the 360 before Microsoft got in there and squashed that themselves. And while they are winning with the PS5, they're only up a few thousand units. A few thousand. Not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, not a million. A few thousand. Do you know why that is? The PlayStation 5 is very big and very bulky. It was not designed for the Japanese market. It was actually designed for the American market. Its policies under Jim Ryan are much more American-style policies, which, as an American, I actually find embarrassing. Meanwhile, there's not a whole lot of interesting game content. The console is not that readily available, as we've said before, and the Xbox is just throwing out Game Pass, which the Japanese are actually kind of getting on board for. As much as, you know, I celebrate Microsoft's success, I would like to celebrate Sony's. And so when I look at Japan being like, maybe PlayStation ain't our thing anymore, that's scary. Just as scary as those cops and whatever they're going to do out there. Anyway, that'll do it for this one. So guys, thank you very much for watching this. If you maybe missed out on the Xbox video, go check that out as well. I think you'll enjoy that. Please stay tuned to other content. As always, check out all the other stuff. And as I said, follow me on all the social media stuff: Twitter, Instagram, Discord, Patreon, Facebook, etc. It's all there. My new channel, Flying and Eating. I appreciate the support. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.